Hello, everyone. This is Yihan, and my team member is Ziqing Sun. Our project name is Fashion Revolution Cultural Framework Plan, and I'll introduce Fashion Revolution first. Fashion Revolution is a not-for-profit limited liability organization operating all over the world. The organization aims to be global with a vast network of designers, brands, retailers, and networks. The organization's central vision is to be recognized as a global fashion industry focusing on the environment and the people over profits and growth. The company's objectives are clear and well-defined, focusing on the conservation of resources and exploitation of both material and human resources. Despite having a clear vision and organizational goals, certain areas need improvisation within the organization. The organizational structure is divided into functional departments and managed by the coordination group. The main functional areas are arts, finance, infrastructure, logistics, and outreach and training. These departments have subunits of their own. Also, there are country coordinators leading country offices or country teams to manage communication, campaigns, and other related activities across different countries. In addition to the coordinators, volunteers, especially student ambassadors, also work in unison with the core structure of the organization. Although not for profit, the company enjoys the legal entity status and wants to expand its operations in the Mexico, South Africa, Guatemala, Spain, and Kazakhstan regions. For further growth and development, it needs to address its internal issues. Next slide, please. The project focuses on improving the fashion revolution's efficiency by improvising its internal and external communication strategy. The main objectives were to engage more volunteers with the organization, increase collaboration in the organization across geographical boundaries, and integrate the selected target markets' cultural aspects, namely Spain, Mexico, Guatemala, Kazakhstan, and South Africa. For this project, the objectives focus on the engagement and the relationship enhancement that the cultural framework plan could bring about. Here are the specific communication objectives. The first one is to reinforce students' ambassadors' relationship with Fashion Revolution. The second one is to engage more volunteers and Fashion Revolution campaign participants in selected Fashion Revolution regions. The third one is to increase collaboration within and across selected Fashion Revolution regions. Although this project is to Fashion Revolution's internal communications operations, it is crucial to measure the message's effectiveness in reaching an external audience, namely volunteers and potential student ambassadors, because its ultimate goal is to make Fashion Revolution's message globally available. Next slide, please. In this section, 3 questions are guiding the research processes. For each question, key information and insights are presented. The first one is that what are the 5 selected countries' cultural foundations and how will they influence the internal communication within Fashion Revolution and the spread of messages in these countries? Well, the culture of Mexico is quite different from the US despite geographical proximity. Mexico's culture is bright and colorful and has been influenced by ancient civilizations like the Maya. Globalization and new technologies have impacted the country with high social media usage among young adults. especially the educated population. In Spain, communication is happening in a diplomatic yet direct manner. Society is created on high power distance, collectivism and masculinity. There is a strong focus on success and achievement in society. However, it has a lower score of 44 in indulgence, indicating little orientation towards leisure and pleasure activities. For internal communication management, utilizing these insights is necessary. Spain is also one of the societies with the growing use of Instagram. People are affected by influencers during fashion brand promotions. The message to the external audience can be communicated through social media more effectively because of wider use and popularity. The cultural foundations of South Africa are diverse, having a variety of ethnicities. The culture strongly focuses on individuality and masculinity, indicating personal achievements over collective benefits. People can be motivated through clear and concrete goals. In terms of internal communication, it also means that personal benefits, both monetary and non-monetary, can be used as rewards to motivate people. Like other emerging markets, the use of digital channels is high among youth. The consumer purchase decision is also found to be influenced by digital platforms in the region compared to retail channels. In terms of fashion and luxury consumption, purchase intentions are influenced by product value perceptions. In the culture of Kazakhstan, there is a high focus on power distance, especially in leadership communication styles. The verbal indications of power distance are also evident in the business context. For internal communication, that represents a strong reliance on organizational hierarchies and management systems. Despite infrastructure hurdles and a lack of digital literacy, the country is embracing new technology. There has been an increasing focus on developing virtual communities and youth involvement on digital platforms in contemporary Kazakhstan. For communicating with a younger audience, a virtual community would be the most suitable channel for rapid growth. Guatemala is one of the countries with very high power distance and uncertainty avoidance while having a negligible preference for individualism. It indicates that the organization needs to set very clear objectives for better internal management without any ambiguity. It also needs to design short, medium, and long-term strategies to avoid uncertainties. As the preference for individualism is negligible, people will be more motivated if they communicate in collaborative terminologies. Social media platforms are used in the country for higher community engagement. The insights from each specific culture would help devise each country's particular strategy for both internal and external communication. The dominant platforms of communication would be different in each region. The hierarchy and management communication would be reflective of the power distance and the collective culture of each country. Next slide, please. The second question is, what are the current communication operations and how are their performances from the perspective of culture? For exploring how fashion revolution is currently spreading its message across the globe from the cultural perspective, the research source is mainly based on the information from Fashion Revolution's internal communication strategy, interviews with internal staff, and social media accounts performance in the various countries. At present, the largest demographic on Instagram is women aged 18 to 24. About 75% of garment workers in the fashion industry worldwide are women, and 58% of women who do online shopping for apparel are in the 25 to 45 age demographic. Therefore, the correct correlation between Fashion Revolution's target audience and Instagram users is relatively high. That is, it is reasonable to study Fashion Revolution's current communication performance by using the performance of Fashion Revolution's Instagram accounts in selected countries. Due to Fashion Revolution's decentralized organizational structure, each country's communication operations are managed by the country itself, guided by the headquarters communication strategy. According to Kathleen Greaves, Director of Education in Fashion Revolution's US, the content distributed by each country is partly from the headquarters and partly created originally by the country team itself. Although directly reposting the content from the headquarters is allowed, what each country expects more is to translate the content. The translation here not only refers to the language, but also includes some habits of words and communication preferences. However, the current situation is that posts published by those selected country accounts are not often adapted in terms of culture and communication preferences beyond the language translation. In contrast, recent posts on Fashion Revolution US account contain lots of Indian cultures, which indicates their effort to make the cultural adaptation. In general, the key finding is that Fashion Revolution has been aware of the need to consider the context of different cultures in the communication operations, but limited by the characteristics of nonprofit organization. They do not have enough resources to carry out the cultural translation. In addition, the low number of student ambassadors and the high turnover rate in the selected country teams also require that final recommendations be made in a form that is easy to understand and grasp in a short time. Next slide, please. The third question is that what are the best practices of communication and HRM of a global organization? The prime motive of internal communication is to increase employee engagement. And the most critical areas of internal communication are feedback, formal and informal communication. Global organizations deal with the challenges of language barriers and cultural differences. One of the most important strategies is reducing or minimizing the language barrier by translating all policies, procedures, and practices into local languages. It will help in the creation of a common understanding ground for all employees regardless of the culture. Another strategy used by multinational companies is to grant a certain degree of control and autonomy to their regional units. The autonomy of regional units will help create more localized communication practices for both internal and external audiences. The standardization can be ensured by the headquarters, while the regional units can make the local adaptations for better translation and the implementation of policies. The ultimate goal of human resources is to assist in the achievement of organizational goals. However, in developing an effective strategy for the organization, the localized context and the situation should always be examined. The local culture factors like individualism and collectivism, power distance, and indulgence should also be considered in designing the human resource strategy. The power distance can also influence the formality level of the organization apart from the hierarchy distance. Global organizations adapt to the local culture to better align organizational practices with the regional culture without losing sight of the organizational goals and objectives. Employee feedback is one of the crucial elements of organizational management. Global organizations involve local employees in understanding and improvising the regional practices of the organization. Thank you.
Now let me introduce our team's recommendations. The first recommendation is to create some checklists of communication patterns and human resource management approaches in terms of culture. We divide this recommendation into 3 steps. First, according to Hofstede's cultural model, we classify each country into a low, medium, and high level based on its scores on the 6 dimensions. 0 to 35 is considered low, 36 to 65 is considered medium, and 66 or above is considered high. Second, we built a general table to summarize the communication patterns and HRM methods in terms of different dimensions according to their implications. I will not go into the details of those implications in this presentation, but you can find them in the appendix in our final report if you are interested. And the last step is to develop the specific checklist by combining the score levels and the corresponding communication and HRM methods. Here is the level table for the 5 selected countries. For example, Guatemala has high power distance, low level individualism, medium level masculinity, and high level uncertainty avoidance. It is worth noting that currently there are no scores for Guatemala on dimensions of long-term orientation and indulgence in Hofstede's model. As you can see, you can check the country level for the 4 other countries. Next is the general table I just mentioned of the communication and human resource methods. For example, we still use these 6 dimensions to categorize the different approaches. Take power distance as an example. In high-level countries, people recognize that power is centralized and are willing to carry out their leaders' orders. But in low countries, it's better to grant power to different units. And in high-level countries, people are expecting formal rules and clear roles and responsibilities. While people in low-level power distance countries may want to discuss what they can do or what they should do with their leaders or their peers. When sharing information in high-level countries, you should pay more attention to the hierarchy. Otherwise, some people may feel offended. Then we can use individualism index as another example. High-level individualism means that it's better to emphasize personal interests, like when Fashion Revolution wants to attract more student ambassadors, you can describe how being a student ambassador for Fashion Revolution can help him or her later in life to work in the fashion industry. But for people in low-level individualism countries, you can describe like how being a student ambassador would benefit his or her community. And for human resource management, providing one-on-one training for people who values individualism is better, but people in low-level individualism countries may prefer group training. In other words, group training may have better results. And you can find other suggestions on the other 4 dimensions in this table. I want to point out that there are many other communication methods that can be affected by the 6 dimensions, but those methods we chose are very closely related to Fashion Revolution. For example, power distance also affects how people think about salary gap. But because people in Fashion Revolution are working voluntarily. So we don't include how to manage the salary gap in this table to keep this table simple. And this is the final checklist you can directly use. We still take Guatemala as an example. For power distance, individualism, masculinity, and uncertainty avoidance, you can find the corresponding communication and HRM methods according to Guatemala's score level. And here you can see that the masculinity is in the medium level. When the score is located in the medium level, we have to further look at whether the score is more inclined to the low level range or the high level range to judge how to choose the communication patterns. But there's no score on the dimension of long-term orientation. We think it's better to cover the implications of both high-level and low-level societies. Specifically, when you want to encourage someone in Guatemala to do a task, you can describe both quick results and future benefits to encourage this person to do something. And Guatemala doesn't have score on the dimension of indulgence. Considering a lot of social media followers and people in student ambassadors communities are young generation. So we think it's better to apply the communication patterns of high level indulgence here. Like emphasize doing something is of great fun, use more positive tone when communicating with others, and use more bright colors in social media posts, and interact more with others via internet. And these are the checklists for other 4 countries. They are created in the same way as the checklist of Guatemala, so I won't explain too much. Next is our second recommendation. This recommendation is to conduct cultural orientations for new staff, including employees, student ambassadors, and volunteers. This recommendation has 2 parts. One part is for a shift in perception. The other part is to master intercultural communication tools or techniques. Culture affects how we digest external information, how we structure the information, and the meanings we assign to the processed information. Consequently, it may foster ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the tendency for people to think their own culture is better than other cultures. What's more severe, ethnocentrism can bring about stereotypes, prejudice, and racism. So for better intercultural communication and for better spreading messages in different cultural contexts, it's important to break down the prejudice and stereotypes. That is to say, the cultural orientation should emphasize like Fashion Revolution members should be open-minded and respect for other cultures. And Fashion Revolution can also introduce some intercultural communication tools or techniques to help new staff better understand other cultures. For example, one tool can be Hofstede's cultural framework. This framework is the theory behind our first recommendation. Also, Edward Tijo's idea of low context and high context cultures can guide people how to communicate properly in different countries. I remember Kathleen said that there's no need to turn orientation into lectures in universities. So we think a proper approach here is to just briefly introduce those theory or tools at the orientation. And the new staff can refer to them later when they need those tools or when they encounter some cultural conflicts. And to further control the cost, Fashion Revolution could create videos or recording slides for the cultural orientations. Then new staff can learn on their own without requiring the organization to expend additional manpower, time, and money every time. And here is our last recommendation. It is to develop a repository for all Fashion Revolution members to share cultural related content. As you can see, here is a model of culture. This model is created by a scholar named Dodd. Dodd thinks that culture has 3 layers. The inner core of culture consists of the history, identity, beliefs, values, and worldviews. The intermediate layer of culture involves activities as manifestations of culture, including rules, material objectives, communication patterns, artistic expressions, and a lot of elements. This layer is connected to the inner core and has more capacity to change. The outer layer of culture includes religion, economy, politics, family, healthcare, and education. Also, the outer layer tied to the inner core, but relatively flexible. We can see from the model that culture is such a broad concept, and the 3 layers of culture are interactional. It means that the more Fashion Revolution members know about a certain country's values, beliefs, history, politics, religions, and other culture-related elements, you will naturally have a better understanding of the country's communication patterns. Although the repository requires people to constantly upload or update new cultural-related content, but this recommendation does not require Fashion Revolution staff to devote extra time and effort to specially collect culture-related content. For example, articles or videos that you read or watch while you are at work, as well as information collected for social media posts, can be used as resources to be uploaded to the repository. For example, we just mentioned that Fashion Revolution US Instagram account has a lot of posts about the Indian culture. You can upload your raw data or raw material about India to the repository if possible. Then members in other countries can learn from these contents. When the repository is big enough, it can even provide inspiration for future social media posts or other communication or promotion materials. And we know developing a repository might cause extra cost for Fashion Revolution. However, we can pursue a collaboration with Casey Chassier and Laura. The other team is planning to implement a new CRM platform for Fashion Revolution. The cultural repository could be one of the modules on the new platform. And I think their recommendations can help the repository very easy to use. That's all we recommend. Whole power recommendations will be useful. Here's the references. Do you have any questions?
This was so in depth. I took so many notes. I appreciate the overview and how you started with the bigger picture and understanding the decentralized aspect of the full Fashion Revolution team and the then breakdown of how the Hofstede's cultural dimensions come into play, and then to break it down into how does that specifically communicate through Fashion Revolution's outreach interculturally. I think my one question is really towards the last part of sharing a repository of cultural information, in that how do we make sure that the repository does not, when another country shares another country's information, how do we make sure that we're not appropriating the information in the wrong way? And how do we protect that communication so we're not going down the road of creating just a, almost a, making sure that we're sensitive to what we're sharing and we're not just reappropriating the information. And I think that's been a high concern, especially with what's happening in India and how we're also, trying to share the information in the US of what's happening, but it's also been called out as cultural appropriation.
I think if possible, the best way is that I am Chinese, so Chinese people to share Chinese culture and American people to share American culture. But as we researched, like some countries, country team don't have that much resources to do the cultural research. So maybe like a US team are sharing Indian culture. I am thinking, is that possible to like set up a discussion board in the repository or in the on the platform? So when people in different countries share their cultural ideas or content, then the people in the original country can comment their thoughts on the content. We can have a discussion. So in this way, like we Chinese people can see what is people in United States are thinking about our culture, and people in the United States can know what is Indian people are thinking about their perceptions. Am I clear?
That is clear. Thank you so much. This was a great presentation and it was so specific and streamlined and easy to follow. So I really appreciated this outcome.
Thank you.